Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part six as we look at the first portion of Christianity. And we finished up essentially with, historically two of the major sacraments, which is baptism and the Eucharist, the Holy Communion. So now let's turn to the early church structure. And you can see this in the letters to Timothy and Titus, the pastorals. But to give a little bit of a more detailed view of this, I want to again read the letter from Ignatius of Antioch to the Samaritans, which again, this was written around the years 107 to 110 CE/AD, so early second century. You must all follow the bishop as Jesus Christ follows the Father, and the presbytery as you would the apostles. Reverence the deacons as you would the command of God. Let no one do anything of concern to the church without the bishop. Let that be considered a valid Eucharist which is celebrated by the bishop or by one whom he appoints. Wherever the bishop appears, let the people be there, just as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. Nor is it permitted without the bishop either to baptize or to celebrate the agape, that would be the Eucharist. But whatever he approve, this too is pleasing to God, so that whatever is done will be secure and valid. Okay, so here are essentially these offices that take place by the laying on of hands, which is referred to as holy orders. You have, and I'm going to have it here in Greek transliterated, but you have episcopal, episcopus in Greek, but we refer to this office in English as the bishop or the overseer. Now, the bishop, he is considered a successor to the apostles and is in charge of a particular area, which would later be called a diocese or see for short. The word diocese refers to as administration. His major jobs are to celebrate the sacraments, the big one being the Eucharist, maintain orthodoxy, and to train those beneath him. So the bishop is recognized as a successor to the apostles. So the authority that the apostles had, the bishop has. Historically speaking, the main bishop would be the Roman one, who is recognized as the successor to Saints Peter and Paul. He's in charge of a particular area, would later be called a diocese or see for short, but the word refers to administration. His major jobs are to celebrate the sacraments, the big one being the Eucharist, the Holy Communion, maintain orthodoxy, that would be right teaching, and to train those beneath him. Well, next, you have the presbyter or presbyteroi, and in English, we refer to this office as priest or elder. The English word for priest derives from the Greek word presbyter, but it literally means elder or old man. But the presbyter slash priest, he serves as the bishop's assistant in celebrating the sacraments. So the presbyter slash priest, he serves as the bishop's assistant with celebrating the sacraments. The big one would be the Eucharist, the Holy Communion, but six of the other sacraments as well. The only sacrament he cannot celebrate is the sacrament of holy orders. Only the bishop can celebrate that sacrament because he is looked upon as being a successor to the apostles. Um, but essentially, the notion is that when the bishop cannot celebrate the sacraments because he can't be everywhere at once, so he designates that authority to the presbyter, or in contemporary English, priest, that he will be the person that will celebrate the sacraments. And then next, you have the deaconate. And in contemporary English, we refer to this office as the deacon. But the deacon, he acts as a servant to the community. The word deacon refers to servant. He assists widows, helps the poor, etc. The deacon, he can celebrate the liturgy, that would be the public ministry, but not with the exception of baptism, any of the sacraments. So the deacon, he acts as a servant to the community. The word deacon refers to servant. He assists widows, he helps the poor, etc. He can celebrate the liturgy, that would be the public ministry, such as the liturgy of the word, the Bible, the gospel, but not with the exception of baptism, the sacraments. So he can baptize, he can preach, but he can't celebrate the Eucharist or any of the other sacraments. Um, So, to give an example, a deacon, and this is on the case with the Catholic side, he can marry a couple, but if the couple wants to have, a mass, the celebration of the Eucharist, the deacon can't do that. A presbyter slash priest or the bishop has to do that. Or, again, with a funeral, the deacon, he can celebrate the funeral liturgy, but if the family of the deceased wants, the celebration of the Eucharist, the deacon can't do that. Um, they would have to get a presbyter or a bishop to do that. And then you have essentially what's known as the royal priesthood. The lay priesthood are all baptized Christians. Commonly, this is referred to as the priesthood of all believers. As mentioned previously with baptism, everybody is considered a priest by the nature of their baptism. You share in the priesthood of Christ, which is understood to be superior to the Jewish. But you also have what is known as an ordained priesthood that takes place by the laying on of hands. And in that ordained priesthood, you have the bishop, the presbyter slash priest, and then the deacon. And this was essentially the early church structure until we would get to Protestantism. Protestantism puts an emphasis on the priesthood of all believers. Now, there are some Protestant churches that do maintain these offices, but they are understood to be different than what they would be from a Catholic perspective or an Orthodox perspective or an Anglican perspective. Anglican refers to the Church of England. Um, and I'll also mention that when it comes to churches that do maintain this traditional structure, and it comes to issues regarding church politics or really more specifically church corruption, it's almost always going to come back to the office of the bishop because he is the person in charge, he is the boss. But one last thing to look at here, some early important Christian centers, or sees, short for diocese. The important early Christian areas, or sees, at the end of the first century were those that were associated with an apostle or had an important geographical feature. Here are the most important early Christian centers from top to bottom. At the top, you have Rome associated with Saints Peter and Paul. And then you have Alexandria associated with St. Mark, who traditionally was a disciple of Peter. Then you have also Antioch. Then Antioch is next, which is also associated with St. Peter. And then last, you have Jerusalem, that's associated with James. This was essentially the early patriarchy, the early church patriarchy at the end of the first century. And this would be the patriarchy until really you get to the fourth Yeah, I believe, yeah, late fourth century, if memory serves me correct, where essentially Constantinople has been moved below Rome. So it's second after Rome. And sometimes I get asked, why is Antioch not higher because it's associated with St. Peter? Well, for one, I would say that Rome is at the top because that is where Peter and Paul, did ultimately die. And of course, you do have the role of Paul there too. And, Paul is looked upon as the next important early Christian leader after Peter. So, anyway, that is essentially all for the first portion of Christianity. So, if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Until then, take care.